Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems like good old Microsoft actually had to accept a little bit of L's. Now, ladies and gentlemen, one thing that I've made a bit of a topic on is talking about how bad Windows 11 actually really is. We looked at their Copilot crap. We actually engaged with their AI nonsense. We looked at all their agentic nonsense on Windows. And, I've tried to be overall fair when it comes to my coverage of this stuff. Like, I've actually showed you how to install this stuff, get it up and running, and I actually did use it. And to be fair with you, with failure rates of around 50% on some of their products, I wondered why is one of the most used operating systems in the world just allowing this level of dog shit? So of course, for anybody that wants to just get the raw numbers out of the fact, most of the world does in fact use Windows on their desktop computer. Now, to give you an idea, one thing that you have to look at on the internet is Microsoft Windows is basically one of the most default operating systems out there, okay? Even if you look at things like Linux, for instance, we Linux people sit at basically 1 to 2, maybe 3% if we're actually lucky and the rounding error is in our favor. Now, the reason I'm making this video is Microsoft's doing a lot of backtracking. Our commitment to Windows quality. So basically, they've heard a lot of bitching over the last year. It's safe to say that a lot of people, even in the Windows community, the diehard Windows fandom, which I think is really weird to be fans of an operating system. I mean, guys, these are corporate companies and pieces of software. Let's not get crazy. A lot of the big news publications, a lot of just people have generally been looking at this and going, man, how worse can it get? Well, it seems like Microsoft has sort of decided that, listen, we're getting roasted, let's talk about making things right again. So to give you an idea, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go over the list of changes, and honestly, I think it's probably a good thing that they're doing, okay? This actually is a positive video, okay? See, complaining works sometimes. So to give you an idea, what is Microsoft making right again? Well, for one, they're letting you reposition the old taskbar. Now, I didn't know this was a thing. I guess Microsoft locked the taskbar to the bottom functionality and centered the actual, start button. And the only, customization you could do is move that start button all the way to the left. Well, it turns out that they've apparently decided to allow people to have more control and freedom over their system. Now, to me, I don't really care where the fuck my taskbar is. I care if the system that I'm running actually runs smooth. So this is the real important part, integrating AI where it's most meaningful. Now, of course, they were never going to get rid of artificial intelligence. Come on, you knew that was fucking stupid. You will see us be more intentional about how and where Copilot integrates across Windows. So it's going to be there, okay? Focusing on experiences that are genuinely useful and well-crafted. As part of this, we're reducing unnecessary entry points. So applications like Snipping Tool, Photos, Widgets, and the Notepad are not going to have any form of Copilot, or they're going to reduce that shit pretty heavily. And I think, given the fact that, how many of these applications seem to have been broken, whether it's because Microsoft is basically vibe coding their actual operating system, like using the AI to write the actual underlying code, leading to more and more bloat and less fixing from Microsoft, because ultimately, the people behind the middle managers are more interested in seeing the lines of code go up, but not interested in seeing actual meaningful code be delivered to the user. So that's actually a good thing. I didn't expect them to remove Copilot. They put so much money into it, but I'm glad to see that they're reducing the entry points. Reducing disruption from Windows updates. Now this is basically this is actually heavenly. Receiving updates should be predictable and easy to plan, so we're giving you more control. This includes the ability to skip updates during device setup, okay? Restart or shut down without installing updates, and pause updates for longer when needed, all while reducing update noise. So again, updating on Microsoft Windows, I think you can delay updates, but it's only to a certain point. After a while, you will have to update your Windows, and for some people, they just don't update their system at all. I don't personally get it. But yeah, updates do break your system, right? It does tend to happen. For me, one of the biggest issues with updating Windows has always been that in the middle of what I'm doing, or whenever Windows feels like it, generally it'll just blank out the screen, update the system, and then reboot the entire process. Generally, underneath things like or Linux, for instance, if I need to update my computer, all I do is open up a terminal shell, I type in this specific terminal command, enter in my super user password, and of course, it'll look for new updates, and I can choose if I want to install these right now, or if I don't want to install these right now. So of course, obviously I can see that, underneath this update, there seems to be some actual backend core updates that's going to force me to restart. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to hit no. Or actually, you know what? Just to show you guys, I will update my system right here. I'm just going to hit yes. And as we're talking, you can see that my system hasn't been blanked out. It's just downloading all the updates to begin with, and I can just put this somewhere else. So I can actually record my video. I can use my computer as it's doing this stuff in the background. Anyways, they're going to make a faster and more dependable File Explorer. File Explorer is one of the most used surfaces on Windows. No shit, everyone needs to check what the fuck's going on in their computer, right? Our first round of improvements will focus on a quicker launch experience, reduced flicker, smoother navigation, and more reliable performance. To give you context on a free and open source system, this little File Explorer, I just hit it once, and whoa, look at that, it just starts right there. What a shock! And I can always just go between my system, browse whatever I need to, do split tasks. Hell, I can even navigate the entire thing with a terminal right here. So again, to give you context here, yes, Microsoft File Manager is not exactly the greatest. There have been people who have made free versions, like freeware versions, that actually perform a lot better, like File Pilot, so I'm glad they're fixing this crap. Awesome. So what they say over here is less disruption from Windows, so you move devices to a single monthly reboot, as opposed to, again, my device that I couldn't even, I wouldn't even have to reboot this thing for 3 months if I didn't want to. Not saying that I don't, I typically do tend to be a pretty rapid updater and restarter, especially when it comes to my desktop system, simply because I do like having the latest and greatest updates. And again, with Linux, even if this update breaks my system, I can just load into the exact system configuration that I was on yesterday or the day before, using things like Timeshift to just instantly restore my system installation. Is it something as simple I can do on Windows? No, not at least in my experience. Now, do I think that Linux caused them to necessarily do this? No. To be honest with you, it wasn't really that. Microsoft has been facing so much bad press, and in a lot of ways have actually gotten some level of competition. Now, this is just a little bit of speculation for me, but I don't know if you've been following Apple, but they released this thing called a MacBook Neo, which isn't particularly awesome. It's an $800 computer, but it comes with the same chip that is in one of their latest iPhones. And of course, it comes with 8 gigabytes of RAM, 256 gigs of memory. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, and it really isn't. But if you used Apple's macOS, it's a pretty performant operating system. It is a very snappy system. And if you look at this computer, right, this $800 system, and you compare it to an equivalent computer that is around $700 or in some cases $670, you can see that the processor that is being provided here generally will, in my experience, perform weaker than the MacBook Neo. This Windows laptop will definitely feel sluggish compared to the MacBook Neo. Now, obviously, some people would buy the MacBook Neo because it's $800, not $1,500. So for people that are in that budget system, that budget laptop world, I'm surprised to say it, but it seems like Apple might have made the laptop that most people will probably gravitate towards when they're in a store. Because generally using macOS feels like you're driving a luxury vehicle compared to Microsoft Windows. And, at some point, I wouldn't even be doubting it, but I'm pretty sure that, people like Asahi Linux might even find a way to port their project over to the MacBook Neo. But yeah, that's an interesting world. I think that a lot of this is happening because Microsoft realizes that their system has gotten so bloated and so performance hoggy that, again, that's not even a real word, but you get the idea. That, even when you're comparing it with things like SteamOS, these are actual actual frame rate comparisons between, SteamOS and Microsoft Windows running on the Legion Go S, one of these handheld gaming computers. And you can see that in certain games like Cyberpunk 2077, going from 46 frames on Windows all the way to around 59 is a pretty huge increase, 28%. Now, obviously, it's not always perfect. There are games like Homeworld 3 that go from 15 to 17 frames. So while it's a 13% increase, let's not pretend that that's a fucking make it or break it section. Now, in some cases, you can go from games that are running at like 15 frames or 18 frames like Returnal and go up to 33. So a game that's choppy is now playable at 30. And of course, obviously, battery life is where things also matter. So playing something like Cyberpunk 2077 and going to a 25% plus battery life on something like Linux is kind of fucking huge to see, right? Like, these are big, tangible benefits. And the reason why these matter too is because in some ways, you're also paying less for the Steam OS version because you're not paying Microsoft for their, Windows key or whatnot. So literally, I think Microsoft realizes that in a lot of fronts, they're definitely taking massive L's. And in a world like today, where competition is sort of around the corner, when people purchase a laptop or a computer or a desktop system, they don't really care what the fuck operating system they're running, right? Like, most people in the world don't care if they're using Windows, Mac, or Linux, right? For them, all they care about is if they can open up a web browser, they can access the websites that they love going to, the services that they love going to. If Linux had every single application working underneath them that, people wanted on Windows, especially the ones that people really can't leave Windows without, like work applications, a lot of editing stuff, AutoCAD, things like that. If everything was one-to-one on Linux and Mac, I think a lot of people would probably just end up getting a Linux system or a Mac, because Windows and all of its bloat ultimately make it the worst of the three when you're looking at, getting the most out of your system. I think to end things off with, when you look at programs like Windows 11 debloat, this is a program that you download and you click all of these options depending on, whatever is important to you to debloat all of the crap that Windows comes with. And this is the problem. Look, I don't hate Windows for no reason. I actually am a huge lover of things like Windows XP. I think generally the last good Microsoft Windows operating system that dropped was probably around Windows 7, honestly, maybe even Windows 10. This is when Microsoft just released a performant operating system. It didn't have all the extra bullshit. It just was the operating system. You install it and you basically just use it as you need. One of the reasons why I love things like Linux, for instance, is that when you're installing like Arch Linux, which is a more expert-oriented Linux distribution, you really are just installing the files and packages that you need. You don't have to install all the extra bloat. In fact, you go through the entire process by yourself, okay? If you don't use a script, you have to go through the entire installation process piece by piece by piece. And that's the important part about it, right? That's the big deal. Microsoft comes with so much extra bloat these days that obviously for people that just want a performance system, it just gets in their way. Especially if you're somebody that has a budget computer or a mid-end computer where you can know that if you're playing video games, maybe Microsoft Windows is causing you to lose more frames than what you're actually fucking used to. Now, the big thing about this too is like, even when it comes to things like gaming, like aside from Marathon, which I absolutely enjoy, I've got 65 hours in the game already, I'm fucking addicted. This requires Microsoft Windows. Now, if anti-cheat and a lot of those programs worked one-to-one, I wouldn't doubt a lot of people would switch from Windows to Linux tonight, or Mac even, if it meant that they could get more frames, more performance, and ultimately less control, like less surveillance crap, less AI crap on their systems. Even when it comes to games like single-player stuff, most of that shit just works out of the box. I played some Crimson Desert all the way on my Linux system. Everything worked, cranked all the graphics to max, and it worked without an issue. Now, aside from, again, this completely being captured on Linux, I have every single feature set enabled, DLSS ray regeneration, some frame generation. I also have, again, the full path tracing, or at least the highest setting of ray tracing they have. The game is running at the highest possible settings at around 80 to 100 frames per second, pretty stable. Now, again, this is important because, years ago, running a game day one underneath Linux might not have been a possibility, but now it really is. Everything just works. Aside from, again, your obvious anti-cheat kerfuffles, things like this work.
And the thing about Windows is, look, if Microsoft released an operating system that, pretty much was debloated to start, like a Windows 11 or at this point Windows 12 core, where you would have to, the only way to really fix it is if when you install Microsoft Windows, they give you the chance to do local accounts, none of this internet connected, you need a Microsoft account all day, every day. They would have to remove things like Microsoft OneDrive, a lot of these bloated applications from being pre installed that just do nothing but annoy the end user. And when it comes to things like artificial intelligence, as much as some people hype that shit up, it should be an optional download. Make it like what Apple does, right? You have to go to the settings, enable things like Apple Intelligence, and then download the models as you see fit. If they can just do, again, even these simple 3 steps, just a debloated experience, everything is an optional download if you really need it. And if they took away, again, all of these internet connected requirements, it would make Microsoft Windows seriously competitive again. I might even consider switching back to it from Linux. But again, they're not going to do that because Microsoft Windows is the gateway drug to get you into using AI and all this extra crap. So I'm a little bit reserved. I think that Microsoft is doing this because they know people are ragging on Windows rightfully. But ultimately, do I think they're going to do more than just talk? Probably not. This sounds like a decent plan, but aside from a few points, none of it really matters to me at least.
I think it's kind of commendable, like cool, awesome. But maybe I don't know. Maybe it might be a little too late. They're literally only doing this because they finally have some competition. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.